It was Catherine's birthday dinner. My wife, gone 1 year. That night, my son-in-law Connor slapped my daughter 3 times across the face, just because she spilled water. His mother Judith stood up and clapped. "That's how she learns to behave," she said. "They thought their power could silence me. They thought I'd sit there and take it. They had no idea who they were dealing with." I stood up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. I pulled out my phone and made one call. What happened next? They didn't stop screaming. Their world collapsed, all because they dared to hurt my daughter in front of me. Comment now? What's your first reaction to what happened at that dinner table? And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm reading every single comment. My name is Christopher Barnes. I am a lawyer who has spent 32 years defending women from abusive men. But nothing prepared me to witness my own daughter being struck right in front of me by the man she called her husband. That night, after I called the police and watched Connor Foster being taken away in handcuffs, I sat in my study and tried to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. How had I, a man who had dedicated his entire professional life to recognizing the signs of abuse, missed them completely in my own home? The answer wasn't simple, but it started 18 months earlier when my world had already begun to collapse in a different way. My wife, Catherine, was a psychologist specializing in trauma and family dynamics. She was brilliant, compassionate, and had an uncanny ability to read people. One evening about 5 years ago, Catherine and I had dinner with our daughter Hannah and her new boyfriend, Connor Foster. Halfway through the meal, Catherine leaned over and whispered something to me that I should have taken more seriously. There's something not quite right about him. At the time, I dismissed it. Hannah was glowing. She was happy. How could I question that? But Catherine wasn't wrong about much. She passed away 18 months ago, a massive stroke while she was sleeping. Just like that, she was gone. The woman who could read a room like a book, who understood the psychology of relationships better than anyone I knew, was no longer here. And with her death, I lost not just my wife, but also my compass. I threw myself into work, into cases that demanded my attention, into anything that could keep my mind off the emptiness in our home in Chicago. Our beautiful house that had once been filled with her laughter now felt like a museum of memories. During those months of grief, I barely noticed when Hannah seemed to pull away. I was too absorbed in my own pain. I didn't see that she'd stopped mentioning her friends. I didn't register that she'd quit her job at the engineering firm where she'd been thriving. I didn't ask questions when she started wearing longer sleeves, even as spring turned to summer. I was a lawyer trained to spot patterns of control and abuse in other people's families. But I was blind to what was happening in my own. Hannah is 30 years old, smart, capable, and engineer with a mind that solves complex problems, like it's breathing. She inherited Catherine's ability to read people and my tenacity. She got married to Connor Foster 2 years ago. On paper, he seemed perfect. Successful, charming, a consultant who spoke with confidence about his work. At our wedding, I remember thinking he was exactly the kind of man I would have wanted for my daughter. How wrong I was. That night at the dinner table, when Judith's applause echoed through the room after her son struck my daughter, something inside me shifted. The fog of grief that had been clouding my judgment for 18 months suddenly lifted. In that single moment of clarity, I understood what I had failed to see. My daughter had been trapped, and I had been too lost in my own sorrow to notice. My wife had been right about Connor all those years ago, and now I had to decide what kind of father I was going to be. One who could finally see the truth, or one who would keep pretending everything was fine. I chose to see. 5 years ago, Hannah was at an industrial engineering conference in Boston. She was 27, then brilliant, independent, the kind of woman who made Catherine and me incredibly proud. That's where she met Connor Foster. He was also 27, a consultant who worked for some firm in the Midwest. From what Hannah told us, they talked for 3 hours straight. 3 hours. She didn't even notice the time passing. He was charming, the kind of man who makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. Smart, successful, with an easy confidence that made everything he said sound important. When Hannah called to tell us about him, I could hear the excitement in her voice. Catherine met him first. It was a dinner at our place a few months later. I remember Catherine being polite, smiling, asking the right questions. But after he and Hannah left, Catherine pulled me aside in the kitchen. "There's something not quite right about him," she said quietly. I asked what she meant, but she just shook her head. "I can't explain it, but trust me on this one. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened. I wish I'd asked more questions instead of brushing it off as Catherine being overprotective. But I was busy with cases and Hannah seemed happy. Who was I to question that? They got married 2 years later. It was beautiful, Hannah looking radiant in her white dress, Connor playing the perfect husband. I remember thinking that Catherine had been wrong about him, but Catherine wasn't wrong about much. At first, everything seemed fine. Hannah mentioned she'd stopped going to the gym on Friday nights because Connor preferred they spend that time together. She'd given up meeting her college friends for happy hour. When I asked about it, she smiled and said she was just prioritizing differently now. Connor makes me happy, she said. Then came the subtle comments. Maybe you shouldn't wear that dress to work, Connor would say, or you talk too much in meetings. Hannah would laugh it off, but I noticed she started dressing differently. More conservative, less like herself. Maybe you're too independent, Connor told her once at dinner. Women need to learn how to listen, not always try to lead. Hannah just nodded and smiled. She didn't argue back. That wasn't like her. I should have seen it then. I should have recognized the pattern. But I was too caught up in my own world, too focused on my cases. Then Connor mentioned his mother. My mom's going to move closer to us, he said one evening. She's been thinking about relocating to Chicago anyway. It'll be nice to have family nearby. Hannah's smile tightened just a little, but she said nothing. That was when I should have paid closer attention. That was when I should have asked my daughter if everything was really okay. But I didn't. Within months, Judith Walsh would arrive in Chicago with plans none of us could have anticipated. Judith Walsh arrived like a storm I didn't see coming. She was 62, a widow who had raised Connor alone. Within days of moving 3 blocks away, she had a key to their house and used it freely. Every morning brought her through the front door. She'd reorganize the kitchen, throw out Hannah's spices, comment on her clothes skirts, too short blouses too revealing. The mashed potatoes were always too salty. Nothing Hannah did was ever quite right. And Connor agreed with everything his mother said. When Hannah tried to push back, he'd side with Judith. Mom knows what she's talking about, he'd say. Hannah would just nod and retreat further into herself. I noticed she stopped laughing. Her calls to me became shorter. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd say, "Just tired, Dad." 8 months after Judith moved to Chicago, Connor hit Hannah for the first time. It started over something small. She'd forgotten his dry cleaning. When he came home and realized it, something shifted in his face. He said she was careless, disrespectful, that she didn't know her place. That's when he hit her. Just once that first time. Not hard enough to leave a visible mark, but hard enough for Hannah to understand that something fundamental had changed. He apologized, immediately. Held her, told her he loved her more than anything. He bought her flowers the next day. Hannah believed him. She believed it was a one-time thing. But it happened again. The pattern became familiar. Trigger, explosion, apology, gifts, temporary peace, then trigger again. Each time the reasons were trivial. She wore the wrong thing. She spoke out of turn. She used a tone he didn't like. And each time after Connor hit her, Hannah would search for what she'd done wrong. She'd replay the moment in her head, trying to avoid it next time. This was her fault. She needed to be more careful, more aware, more obedient. Around the same time Hannah quit her job, I suspect Connor demanded it. A woman at home is easier to control than one out in the world, making her own money, seeing other people, thinking her own thoughts. I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed that my brilliant daughter, the engineer who used to talk about changing the world, had stopped talking about anything at all. The moment that finally broke through my blindness came about 6 months later. I was at their house for dinner. While Connor was running late, I went to get something from the kitchen drawer, and I found it Catherine's Japanese knife. The beautiful one I'd given her years ago, now bent and damaged beyond repair. Hannah saw me holding it and went pale. "What happened to this?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just looked away and started setting the table with trembling hands. I didn't press her. I just put the knife back and pretended I hadn't seen it. But that broken knife stayed with me. It felt like a message from Catherine herself, a signal that something was terribly wrong in my daughter's life. 18 months passed like that, Connor's rage intensifying, Hannah shrinking further, Judith orchestrating it all. And then came that dinner on March 20th, the one I will never forget. March 20th, the day that changed everything. I remember every detail with the clarity that comes from trauma. That evening was Catherine's birthday. She would have been 61. Hannah had called me that morning. "Dad, come to dinner tonight, please." There was something in her voice I should have caught, but I was drowning in work using cases to outrun grief. When I arrived at their Chicago townhouse, everything looked perfect. Fine china, scented candles, fresh flowers, but the air felt wrong, cold, suffocating. Hannah emerged wearing a long-sleeved blouse despite the mild March evening. Her hair was cut short and severe. She looked like she was trying to disappear. When she hugged me, I felt how thin she'd become. Connor and Judith were already seated. Judith smiled with warmth that didn't reach her eyes. Connor shook my hand firmly, his charm switched on. They were performing the role of the perfect family. We began dinner with small talk. Judith dominated the conversation about her real estate investments and book club. Hannah barely spoke. She ate mechanically, her eyes fixed on her plate. Connor's hand occasionally reached for his wine, and I noticed how Hannah's shoulders tensed. Then it happened. Hannah was pouring water. Her hand trembled slightly, and a single drop fell into Connor's glass. It was nothing, but Connor's entire body went rigid. "Do you see what you did?" he said quietly. His voice was controlled, calculated. "I'm sorry I didn't," Hannah started. That's when he stood up. What happened next took maybe 5 seconds. His hand came up fast, connecting with Hannah's right cheek. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Her head snapped sideways. Before she could process it, his hand came around again, harder, catching her left cheek. I saw her eyes widen in shock and pain. Then a third blow across her face. Hannah stumbled backward, her hand reaching blindly. She hit the edge of the table. Blood trickled from her mouth. Judith started clapping. "That's how she learns to behave," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Slow, measured claps, like she was applauding a performance. In that moment, something inside me switched. 32 years of being a lawyer, of maintaining distance and objectivity, evaporated. But I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. Instead, I went silent. 30 seconds of absolute silence. My mind, the part trained over 3 decades to understand restraining orders. Evidence testimony activated. I was taking inventory, the candles masking the smell of violence, the way Judith smiled, the tremor in Hannah's hands, the words they'd said. All of it would matter in court. I pulled out my phone with steady hands. "I'm calling the police," I said. My voice was quiet and professional, the voice I used with judges. Connor's face went pale. Judith's clapping stopped. "You're overreacting," Connor said. "She needs to learn." 17 minutes. I told him already, dialing. "That's how long they'll take from the North Precinct. I suggest you both sit down." I reported the assault calmly. Names, addresses, injuries, witnesses. The dispatcher could hear the control in my voice because I'd practiced it 1,000 times. Before just never for my own daughter. 17 minutes later, Sergeant Thomas Kelly walked through the front door with 2 officers. He noted the blood on Hannah's face, the fear in her eyes, the casual cruelty radiating from Connor and Judith. They were handcuffed and read their rights. Connor kept his eyes on me as they let him out. "You don't know who you're fucking with," he said quietly. "Enjoy the ride to the precinct," I replied. But even as I said it, I knew he was right. I didn't know. None of us did. We had no idea that his arrest was only the beginning of something far darker, something that would unearth secrets buried for 11 years. The days following the arrest were strange, quiet but threatening, like waiting for a storm you could see gathering on the horizon. Hannah stayed at my house in Georgetown. She barely left her room. I'd hear her crying at night, and during the day she'd sit on the couch with her laptop closed, staring at nothing. I tried to tell her it would be okay, that the evidence was overwhelming, that justice would prevail. I'd won cases against worse odds, but my words felt hollow, even to me. 3 days after Connor's arrest, my paralegal called. "Mr. Barnes, there's a blog. You need to see it." I pulled it up immediately. The truth behind false accusations. Anonymous, sophisticated layout, professional writing. It painted a very different narrative than what had happened in my dining room. Hannah was a liar, a woman scorned inventing stories for attention and money. I was a man-hater lawyer, using my daughter as a pawn in an anti-male crusade. Connor Foster was the real victim, a good man destroyed by a toxic woman's fabrications. The blog included photos. Hannah at a party laughing, holding a cocktail. Out of context, it looked damning. Me leaving the courthouse, my face grim and determined, captioned as "the predator's handler." By day 5, the blog had been shared 3,000 times. Hannah got the call from HR on Thursday. They were concerned about the company's reputation. They were deeply sorry, but given the circumstances, they had no choice. She'd worked there for 4 years, Employee of the Month twice, gone in a 5-minute phone call. At the grocery store, an old friend of Hannah's, Rachel Stone, someone I'd known since Hannah was 12, literally turned around in the hair products aisle when she saw us coming. She pretended not to see us. Hannah's face crumpled. Then my accountant called. Christopher, the IRS, wants a full audit. 5 years of returns. They're saying there are irregularities. I knew better. This wasn't about irregularities. This was about leverage. The Foster family had connections, money, resources that reached into places I'd underestimated. That's when it hit me. Really hit me that I'd been so focused on winning the legal battle that I hadn't prepared for this one. The court of public opinion. The quiet destruction of everything Hannah had built. The slow strangulation of my professional reputation. I'd spent 32 years defending women against men who use power to silence them. And now I was watching Connor and Judith do exactly that to Hannah. Except they weren't just using physical force anymore. They were using narrative, whisper campaigns, strategic leaks to sympathetic bloggers, an anonymous, coordinated assault on our credibility. The police had the evidence. The case was solid. But none of that mattered if nobody would listen to us. If every time Hannah tried to speak, people saw a party photo and a cocktail. If every time I tried to advocate, people saw a zealot. Hannah found me in my study that night. She looked smaller than ever. Dad, what if they win? She asked quietly. I wanted to tell her they couldn't. I wanted to promise her that the truth always prevails. But I was learning painfully that the truth is just one voice in a much noisier room. We're not done yet, I said. Not even close. She nodded, but the hope in her eyes had dimmed. 2 weeks passed like that, us in limbo, the blog growing, the whispers spreading, my audit expanding. And then on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was from Connor's jail phone. Tell Hannah I'm coming home and I'm taking what's mine. That's when I realized something else. Connor and Judith weren't just trying to destroy our case. They were playing a longer game. And I still didn't understand the full scope of what I was up against. Connor started texting from jail through his lawyer's phone. The first message came on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm sorry, I've been thinking. I made a mistake. I wasn't myself that night. Hannah read it to me, with trembling hands. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the part of her that wanted to believe him warring with the part that remembered his fists. The second message arrived 2 days later. I've been in therapy. The psychologist says I have impulse control disorder. I never knew. I'm getting help, Hannah. Real help. I'm not the man you saw. That's when she started wavering. Maybe he really didn't know, she said quietly. Maybe it's not his fault. I sat across from her at my kitchen table and pulled up the statistics I'd compiled over 3 decades. 70% of women who return to abusers experience escalated violence within the first year. The data was brutal and undeniable. Hannah listened to me. This is textbook manipulation. The apology, the diagnosis, the therapy narrative. It's designed to make you feel responsible for his healing. It's not. She cried, hard. The kind of crying that comes from being caught between love and survival. I know, she whispered. I know, but I need time to think. I gave her that time. It was the hardest thing I'd done in weeks. 14 days later, the phone rang at 2 a.m. Mr. Barnes, this is Sergeant Kelly. Your daughter's house has been vandalized extensively. My heart stopped. But it wasn't Hannah. It was the townhouse, the one she'd shared with Connor, the one she'd moved out of after his arrest. When we arrived, the scene was devastating. The front door was shattered, windows blown out, spray paint covered every surface. Liar! I will kill you! This isn't over. He'd punched through drywall, smashed furniture. The destruction was systematic, intentional, a 3-hour tantrum of rage captured by every security camera on the block. He violated the restraining order, Sergeant Kelly explained. Called his lawyer from a burner phone, hired someone to get him out for the night. They were sloppy. We have him on video. Multiple angles, crystal clear. Connor was arrested again within hours. I looked at the footage myself. 4 hours later, I was still watching. The way he moved through the house, the precision of his destruction, the moment he sprayed, I will kill you, directly at the camera, looking straight into the lens, daring us to prosecute him. This was no impulse control disorder. This was calculated. This was a message. This was Connor showing Hannah exactly what awaited her if she testified. Finally, we had evidence that was unshakable. Video. Clear as day, indefensible. But as I watched him destroy what had been Hannah's home, I realized something else. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about survival. For both of them, for him and for Hannah. Finally, I told Sergeant Kelly, we have solid evidence, but there's something even more important coming. 3 days later, an anonymous package arrived at the police station. It was addressed to me marked, urgent evidence inside. Inside were audio recordings, hours of them. And when I listened to the first one, I understood why someone had waited 11 years to send them. The package bore no markings, no return address, no postage meter, just my name written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Inside were files, dozens of them, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter. Sergeant Kelly sat across from me in his office as we listened to the first recording. The audio was grainy but clear enough, Judith's voice unmistakable. He needed to understand his place. Women like that, independent women, they need to learn respect. Connor understands that now. I taught him. The second recording came from a different date. Judith again speaking to Connor in a way that made my stomach turn. This is what we did with your father. He wanted to resist too. But some men don't deserve second chances. My hands went cold. The third recording was even worse. Do you think you're capable of doing what's necessary? Judith asked. Yes, Mother. I know what you did, Connor replied. What she had done. Sergeant Kelly paused the playback. Mr. Barnes, we need to bring in homicide. We're reopening the investigation into Richard Foster's death, 11 years ago, listed as a heart attack, but the fourth recording was a direct threat. If Christopher doesn't back away from this, Judith said coldly, perhaps she will have an accident too. Accidents happen to interfering people. That's when the office door opened. An old man stood there, 77 years old, gray hair, trembling hands. Behind him was a younger officer who'd escorted him from the waiting room. I'm Martin Foster, he said quietly. Richard's brother. I'm the one who sent the package. For a moment nobody moved. Martin sat down heavily. His voice was barely above a whisper. I've known for 11 years. Judith killed Richard. I heard her plan it. I heard her do it. But I was afraid. I was always afraid of her. When Richard died, I told myself it was a heart attack. I let myself believe it. Why send the recordings now? Kelly asked. Martin's eyes found mine. Because I watched what she did to your daughter. And I realized that if I didn't act now, she would keep destroying people. She would never stop. She'd already killed once. Why would she hesitate again? He pulled out his phone. I spent 3 weeks getting close to Judith, recording conversations. She talks to Connor about everything when she thinks nobody's listening. She's proud of what she did to Richard, proud of how she's controlled Connor, proud of how she's trying to destroy Hannah. Martin's hands shook as he spoke. I was a coward for 11 years, but watching that young woman get beaten, watching you fight so hard, I couldn't be a coward anymore. I had to choose between my fear and my conscience. I didn't know what to say. There's more, Martin continued. He handed me a folder. Medical records. Richard's autopsy. There was digitalis in his system. Slow acting. Judith had access. She was always giving him supplements, vitamins. Nobody suspected anything because she played the grieving widow perfectly. Sergeant Kelly was already making calls. Federal agents, homicide detectives. The machinery of justice finally shifting in the right direction. As Martin left the office, placed in protective custody immediately, he stopped at the door. I'm sorry it took me so long, he said. I'm sorry I was afraid. I wanted to tell him it didn't matter, that he was brave now when it counted. Now we had proof that Judith Walsh wasn't just protecting an abuser. She was a murderer, a calculated, deliberate killer who'd gotten away with it for over a decade. And she'd raised a son who mirrored her darkness perfectly. With this new evidence, the prosecutor's office reopened the investigation into Richard Foster's death from 11 years before. Everything was about to change. Connor Foster's trial lasted 3 weeks. Judge Leonard Brooks presided over the courtroom, with the kind of patience that comes from seeing too many cases like this. The evidence was straightforward. Security footage of Connor destroying Hannah's home. My testimony about the 3 slaps. Hannah's tearful account of the violence. Sergeant Kelly's professional documentation of the scene. Connor's defense attorney tried. He argued impulse control disorder. He blamed Judith's influence. He claimed Connor was a victim of his upbringing, of his mother's manipulation of circumstances beyond his control. Judge Brooks didn't buy it. The evidence shows a pattern of calculated violence, he said. Not an impulse, a choice. Repeated choices. Connor was found guilty of domestic violence. 5 years in state prison. A permanent restraining order. Mandatory anger management and domestic violence education. As the verdict was read, Connor looked directly at Hannah. His expression didn't change. No remorse, no anger, just emptiness. Like something inside him had died or maybe had never existed at all. Hannah cried, but I saw something else in her tears' relief. 2 months later, we were back in the same courtroom for Judith Walsh. The case was different. The stakes were higher. This wasn't about domestic violence. This was about murder. The prosecution presented the recordings. Judith's own words damning her. Martin Foster testified about what he'd heard, what he'd witnessed over 11 years. The old forensic report on Richard Foster came back under new scrutiny. The digitalis in his system, the accidental heart attack that now looked like calculated poisoning. Financial records showed that Judith had taken control of Richard's entire estate immediately after his death. $2 million. She'd been living off his murder for a decade. Judge Brooks listened to everything with an expression that suggested he'd seen the worst humanity had to offer and accepted it as inevitable. Judith took the stand. She didn't deny anything. Instead, she attacked. "This is what Christopher Barnes does," she screamed at the judge. "He destroys families. He poisons people against their own flesh and blood. He's a man-hating—" "Ms. Walsh," Judge Brooks interrupted, "you're not helping your case." But she didn't care. She kept screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how I'd turned everyone against her, how I was the real criminal. Nobody believed her. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty of felony murder, 12 years in prison. The sentence was reduced from life because of her age, but it didn't matter. Judith Walsh would spend her remaining years in a cell, the same way she'd spent the last 11 years controlling what she could, destroying what she couldn't. As they led her away, she locked eyes with me one last time. There was no remorse there either, just rage, pure undiluted rage that she'd been caught. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I realized something profound. Justice and healing are not the same thing. The law could put Connor and Judith away, but it couldn't undo the damage. It couldn't restore Hannah's sense of safety. It couldn't bring Catherine back. It couldn't erase the years I'd spent drowning in my own grief. Justice was served. The guilty were convicted. The system worked. But real healing, that was a different battle entirely. 6 months later, I stood in front of Catherine's photograph and realized something had changed inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. It was something quieter. Something that felt like permission to stop fighting long enough to actually live again. 5 years have passed since that fateful dinner. I sit in my study in Chicago, watching the afternoon light filter through the windows. The house is quiet now, peaceful in a way it hasn't been since Catherine died. Hannah doesn't live here anymore. She has her own life. She has her own happiness. Last week I watched her laugh with Ryan Parker at a coffee shop downtown. Really laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from someone who's learned the difference between fear and freedom. Ryan is a good man, respectful, genuinely interested in Hannah's thoughts, her dreams. He encourages her to see her friends. He doesn't monitor her phone. He doesn't try to control what she wears or where she goes. He loves her the way love is supposed to feel. As we sat across from each other over coffee, Hannah reached across the table and held my hand. "I wanted to say thank you," she said quietly, "for not letting go, for believing me when I wasn't sure I believed myself." I thought about Catherine in that moment, about how she would have seen this day, how proud she would be. "Your mother would be so proud of you," I told her. Hannah smiled through tears. "I think she knows. I've spent the last year writing my memoir, not to relive the trauma, but to transform it into something useful, something that might help someone else recognize the warning signs I missed. The isolation, the control disguised as love, the way abuse always starts quiet and grows louder until you can't hear anything else. If my story helps even one woman recognize these signs, if it gives her the courage to say no before it's too late, then all of this has been worth it. Connor is in prison. Judith is in prison. They're both exactly where they need to be. But there are thousands more like them. Thousands of Hannahs still trapped. Thousands of Christophers still sleeping through the warning signs. So I'm asking you, when will you speak up? If someone you know is being controlled, isolated, when will you say something? When will you push past the discomfort of getting involved? When will you be willing to ruin a dinner party, sacrifice a friendship, lose a client to save someone's life? And if you're the one being hurt, when will you say enough? When will you realize that what you're tolerating isn't love? When will you understand that you deserve better? True love doesn't require you to disappear. It doesn't demand your submission. It doesn't come with bruises and apologies and promises to change. True love expands you, protects you, celebrates you. I think about Catherine often, about how she tried to warn me about Connor, about how I was too blind with my own grief to listen, but I listened when it mattered. I acted when it counted. And because of that, Hannah is free. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not the memory of the violence, but the proof that it can be stopped. That justice, however imperfect, is possible. That healing, however slow, is real. I stand at my window and watch the Chicago sunset. Hannah's out there somewhere building a life that's actually hers. And for the first time in years, I can breathe. True love never hurts. Never. Looking back at everything that's happened, I realize I made a critical mistake as a father. I was so consumed by my own grief after Catherine's death that I missed the most important case of my life, the one happening under my own roof. Don't be like me. Don't wait until the bruises appear. Don't rationalize the isolation. Don't mistake control for care. Here's what I learned. Real love expands you. It doesn't shrink you. Real love celebrates your independence. It doesn't demand your submission. If someone is slowly cutting you off from friends, monitoring your movements, criticizing everything you do, that's not love. That's a cage disguised as devotion. And I want to tell you something else. God doesn't design love to hurt. I'm a man of faith, and I know that whatever higher power guides us wants us to experience joy, not pain. If you're praying for strength to endure abuse, know that God's answer might be leave. Sometimes protection looks like escape. This isn't just my grandpa's stories or some distant true story you can ignore. This is happening to millions of women right now. Women who wake up one morning and realize they don't recognize themselves anymore. Women trapped in the same cycle Hannah almost didn't escape from. The true story of what happened to my daughter became the catalyst for justice. But yours could be different if you act now. If you recognize these warning signs in your own life or someone you love, don't stay silent. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't hope he'll change. This is where I need you. Comment below and tell me what kept you trapped, or what gave you the courage to leave. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Subscribe to this channel because I'll keep telling these true story accounts until every woman knows her worth. My grandpa's stories pale in comparison to what real women endure, but what matters is that we speak, we listen, we believe. The price of silence is too high. Don't let it be you. I lost my daughter on a cruise ship at 16. They said she went overboard. I buried an empty casket in 6 years of unbearable grief. When I finally gathered the courage to travel again to try living instead of just surviving, I saw someone who made my world collapse. My heart stopped beating. In that instant, everything I thought I knew about loss shattered. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Comment below. I read every single one. My name is Ronald. I was 53 years old when everything fell apart, and this is the story of how I lost everything. Most people would say my life looked good on paper. I had a wife I loved, Nancy. We had a beautiful daughter, Laura, who was 16 at the time. I had a steady job. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had those quiet Sunday mornings where Nancy would make pancakes, and Laura would sit at the kitchen table, sketchbook in hand, drawing whatever caught her eye. Those moments felt like everything. Then everything stopped. 1 year ago, exactly 1 year, I came home from work to find our neighbors sitting with Laura on our front porch. They wouldn't look at me. That's when I knew. Before anyone said a word, I knew. Nancy had an aneurysm. A blood vessel in her brain had ruptured without warning. No symptoms. No warning signs. One moment she was alive, and the next she was gone. Just like that. No goodbyes. No last words. No chance to say the things you always think you'll have time to say. Being a single parent to a grieving teenager is a special kind of hell. I worked, I came home, I tried to be present. I made dinner, asked about her day, pretended I knew what I was doing, but the truth is I was drowning. Every night after Laura fell asleep, I'd sit in the dark of our living room and think about all the moments I'd wasted. All the times I'd come home tired and distant. all the conversations that went unsaid because I was too caught up in my own life. The worst part wasn't the grief itself, it was the regret. The endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys. If only I'd been home 5 minutes earlier. If only I'd kissed her goodbye that morning. If only, if only, if only. That's when something shifted inside me. When the noise finally went quiet enough to hear my own voice. I'd been hiding who I was my entire life. It wasn't until I was alone that I realized the truth about myself. I'd married Nancy because I loved her, I really did. But I'd also married her because that's what you do when you're a man who doesn't fit into the boxes society built for you. You find a good woman, you build a normal life, and you bury the part of yourself that doesn't belong. For 25 years, I did exactly that. But grief has a way of stripping away the lies. When I lost Nancy, I didn't just lose a wife. I lost the person who made the pretense feel worth it. And suddenly, I couldn't hide anymore. I started going to a support group. Not a group for grieving widowers, though that's what they thought I was. I was there because I needed to be around other people who understood what it felt like to be broken, to be alone. To be discovering yourself at an age when most people thought they already had it figured out. And then I met Justin. He was 38, confident, beautiful, in a way that made you forget to breathe. He came into our lives like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He was attentive kind, interested in every detail of my life. He asked about my work, remembered things I'd mentioned in passing, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in decades. He was beautiful and charming, and he made the loneliness stop. Within months he moved in. Within a year I married him. I thought I'd finally found happiness again. I was so wrong. From the moment Justin stepped into our lives, I should have seen it. I was too caught up in my own happiness to notice the way he angled himself toward Laura, how he asked about her drawings with genuine curiosity. But I was too relieved to finally have someone who understood me. He knew exactly how to make her feel heard, special, adult. That's the thing about predators. They don't announce themselves. They arrive as listeners, as the person who finally gets you when nobody else does. For a lonely teenage girl who just lost her mother and had a father too exhausted to see her, Justin was exactly that. He'd ask Laura about her art, really ask. He'd sit with her sketches asking why she chose that color, what it meant to her. Nobody had paid that much attention to Laura before, not me. I was working 60-hour weeks, coming home too tired to do more than heat up dinner and collapse into bed. Justin made time for her in a way I couldn't. Slowly, imperceptibly, he became more important to her than I was. I'd come home and find them in the living room, Laura showing him her latest work. Her whole face lit up in a way it hadn't been since Nancy died. I was relieved. Finally, something was making my daughter smile. It never occurred to me that he was connecting with her in exactly the right way designed to make her trust him completely. Then came the private conversations, texts that made her laugh, her phone face down on the table, as if she had something to hide. I asked about it once, and she said he was helping with art stuff. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. He was supposed to be trustworthy. But I was too busy to verify, too tired, too grateful that someone else was taking care of her emotional needs. By the time Laura turned 16, something fundamental had shifted. She didn't want to hang out with me anymore. Movie nights became awkward. She spent more time in her room. And when she was downstairs, she was looking for him, waiting for his car to pull into the driveway, perking up the moment he walked through the door. I should have recognized the signs. I should have known what it looked like when someone was falling. But I was so grateful my daughter wasn't drowning in grief anymore, I mistook it for healing. One November evening, I came home early. I found them in the kitchen. Laura was showing Justin something on her phone, and he had his hand on her shoulder. His posture, the way he was leaning in the intimacy of the moment, something felt wrong. Then he kissed her. It was quick, barely a second, his lips touching the top of her head. But the way Laura looked up at him with complete surrender, complete devotion, told me everything. I'd seen that look before. It was the look of someone who'd learned that their job was to be perfect for another person. It was the look of someone who'd already started disappearing. Laura was completely under his spell. March 8th, 2018, we boarded the Carnival cruise. Something felt off the moment we stepped on that ship. It wasn't anything I could point to, specifically no single red flag that would make sense to someone else. But there was a tension in the air, a heaviness that seemed to follow us from the moment we checked into our cabin. Laura moved through the hallways like a ghost. Her usual spark dimmed. She'd always loved traveling, loved the idea of adventure, but this felt different. This felt like something she'd agreed to under duress. I told myself it was grief. 3 months had passed since Nancy died, and cruise ships are supposed to be fun, family-oriented places where you make memories. Maybe the weight of this trip being here without Nancy trying to rebuild what we'd lost was just too much for Laura to carry. Justin, on the other hand, was the opposite of tense. He was calm, purposeful. He moved through the ship like he owned it, planning activities, suggesting restaurants, charming the staff. He seemed energized by the space, by the isolation of being at sea with nowhere to escape. Looking back, I understand now that this was intentional. He was enjoying the setup, the trap. The first few days were a blur of dinners I didn't want to eat and activities I suggested to try to force normalcy back into our lives. I'd book a shore excursion and Laura would find a reason not to go. I'd suggest we play mini-golf as a family, and she'd say she wanted to sleep. The excuses were reasonable. What teenager wants to spend quality time with their parents? But they stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. What hurt more was watching Laura gravitate toward Justin instead. I'd find them on the upper deck, her head on his shoulder, as they watched the water. I'd see them in the dining room, Justin leaning close, as he whispered something that made her laugh. They had an ease with each other that didn't include me, a language I couldn't speak, a bond I couldn't break. I tried to convince myself this was fine, good even. She was bonding with her stepfather, she was moving forward, but something in my gut told me it wasn't that simple. On our 4th day at sea, Laura barely came to dinner. Justin said she was tired, that she wanted room service, that teenagers needed space. So I let her have it. I let him convince me that my concern was overprotective, that my worry was suffocating her growth. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative that something was deeply fundamentally wrong was too terrifying to consider. By the 5th day, Laura had stopped pretending. She didn't join us at all. She avoided me in the hallways. When I'd knock on her cabin door, she'd claim to be asleep or busy with schoolwork. Justin would put a hand on my shoulder and tell me to give her time, that pushing her would only push her away further. So I backed off. I gave her space. I trusted him. That night I lay in bed wondering what was wrong, why my daughter looked at me like I was a stranger, why she couldn't meet my eyes, why every conversation had become a minefield. But I was about to find out the hard way. March 12th. Everything changed that night. March 12th, 2018, 3:47 a.m. I woke up, something was wrong. The kind of wrong that doesn't announce itself with noise or violence. It's a feeling, a sixth sense, the absence of something that should be there. Laura's breathing from the other bed, the small sounds teenagers make when they sleep, the rhythm of her being in the room with me. I reached over and felt her mattress. Cold, empty. Panic doesn't creep in slowly, it floods. It consumes. It erases everything else until all you can do is move, search, call out into the darkness. I stumbled out of bed, my heart already racing, and checked the bathroom, the hallway, the common areas we'd been assigned. Nothing. Nobody. By 4:10 a.m. I'd alerted ship security. By 4:20 a.m. I was screaming her name into every corridor of the Carnival Destiny, my voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. Crew members scattered, radios crackled. The calm, organized world of the cruise ship became chaos. Where was my daughter? Justin appeared in the hallway, fully dressed, awake. When I'd been asleep just moments before, he was already up, already looking. Or so he said. He moved through the ship with an eerie calmness, helping security search, suggesting places she might be. His composure was almost professional, almost rehearsed. I didn't have the mental capacity to question it then. I was too busy searching, too busy imagining the worst. At 6:33 a.m. someone found her phone. Deck 7, by the railing. The screen was cracked. No sign of disturbance beyond that. Just a phone abandoned as if its owner had simply let it fall, or had been made to let it fall. That's when the whispers began. The crew members looking at each other with understanding. The unspoken conclusion she'd gone overboard. By 9 a.m. the search was called off. The captain made an announcement. A passenger had been reported missing, presumed deceased. In the time it took for the ship to stop searching, my daughter had crossed from missing to dead in the official record. I remember the captain's words, formal and distant. We extend our deepest condolences to the family. Every precaution has been taken. Unfortunately, in such circumstances, recovery is unlikely. Unlikely, as if there was still hope, as if we were discussing the possibility rather than my entire world ending. Justin stood beside me through all of it, his hand on my shoulder, his voice appropriately grieving. She was depressed, he told security. She'd been distant since her grandmother died. I tried to help her, but she wouldn't let me in. I should have seen the signs. He performed grief with the precision of an actor who'd rehearsed his lines 1,000 times, and I was too broken to notice. By afternoon, we were heading back to Miami. The official report was filed. The investigation was closed before it even really began. One teenage girl, one night, one phone by a railing. Case solved. The captain said my daughter was gone, presumed dead. The paperwork was processed. The death certificate was signed by people who'd never met. Her never knew her, never saw the way she lit up when she was creating art, or the way she laughed when something genuinely amused her. My daughter, gone. March 24th, 2018, the memorial service. The funeral was the worst day of my life, until 6 weeks later. Greenwood Cemetery, South Atlanta. An empty casket beside my mother's grave. Nothing to bury, just paperwork that said she was gone. Sharon held me up as we walked to the grave. My sister. The only person who understood what it meant to lose this family one by one. First Mom, then Nancy, then Laura. The screaming started at the graveside. I didn't recognize the sound coming out of me. It was primal, like something was being torn from my chest. 3 months of holding it together shattered in that moment. I collapsed on the ground next to that empty casket, screaming, "She's not in there, she's not in there," because I knew somehow that something didn't add up. The phone by the railing, the timeline, Justin's strange calmness during the search, but I was too broken to question it. Justin stood beside me through it all, the perfect grieving husband. Nobody questioned him. Nobody looked twice. 6 weeks of him being present, taking care of everything while I sat in the dark. 6 weeks of me being grateful. Then in late April, he packed his bags. "I can't do this anymore," he said. His voice was cold, final. "I need to leave. I can't stay in this house. I can't keep drowning in your sadness." I didn't understand. He was my anchor. "Where will you go?" I asked. "My lawyer will send the papers," he said. I got on my knees literally on our kitchen floor and I begged him. My voice shattered as I spoke. "You're all I have left of her. Please, please don't leave me alone with this." For a moment something crossed his face. Guilt, maybe. But then it was gone, replaced by something colder. He picked up his suitcases and walked out the door. The paperwork was efficient. No negotiation. He wanted nothing. He just wanted out. Fast. Like the place was on fire. But even through the fog, something nagged at me. The timing. The way he'd taken nothing but his clothes. It was too clean. Too planned. I didn't have the capacity to question it then. I was too busy trying to survive. Too busy barely existing. But later, when I could think clearly, I'd start asking questions. I'd discover things that didn't quite add up. Things about his finances, his timing, his movements before the cruise. Things suggesting he'd planned something far longer than I imagined. For now all I knew was that I was alone. 6 weeks after burying my daughter, my husband left me. And I had no idea what else I was about to lose. The next 6 years were a blur of pain. 6 years of learning to breathe, 6 years of learning to live. I don't remember most of 2018. Months blended into one long gray stretch of survival. Waking up was the hardest part. That moment between sleep and consciousness where I'd forget for a split second that my daughter was gone. Then reality would crash back and I'd remember all over again. July 2018. I took too many pills. The doctor said I just wanted one night where I didn't see her face every time I closed my eyes. 72 hours in a psychiatric hold. Janelle moved in after that. "Just until you get back on your feet," she said. But how do you get back on your feet when you have nowhere to stand? I started medication. Real medication. A cocktail that slowly, incrementally made the mornings less unbearable. Not better. Just less impossible. Therapy became my anchor. Dr. Walsh twice a week. At first, then 3 times when things got bad. She didn't push. Didn't rush. Just asked questions. August brought a support group. Parents of lost children meeting in a church basement on Thursday nights. I didn't want to go. Janelle practically dragged me there. But in that room full of broken people, I found understanding. These people didn't tell me it would get better. They just sat with the pain. That's where I met Magnus. He'd lost his son 5 years earlier. Magnus didn't try to make me feel better. He just showed up. We started getting coffee after meetings, then phone calls at 2 a.m. when the nights got too long. "You're allowed to survive this," he told me once. Surviving doesn't mean forgetting. It just means breathing. The years accumulated. Different medications. different jobs. I left psychology entirely, couldn't handle being around families anymore, took administrative work instead, things that required nothing from me emotionally. But somewhere in that gray stretch, something shifted. 2020 came with its own devastation, the world shutting down, and somehow that made sense. Everyone was broken. Everyone was barely holding on. I fit right in. I started asking questions I'd been avoiding, about myself, about who I actually was underneath all the performance. I'd been hiding who I was my entire life. But in the quiet of a pandemic, with nothing but time and pain, I finally started to accept the truth. I was a gay man. I'd been a gay man my whole life. I'd just spent decades trying to be someone else. By 2022, I was different. Not healed, but different. Stronger in the broken places. Panic attacks came less frequently. I could sit through a meal without falling apart. I could think about Laura without screaming. And then one day in 2023, I made a decision. I'd spent 5 years moving through the world like a ghost, but I was tired of surviving. I needed to actually live. I want to take a trip, I told Janelle. Somewhere warm, somewhere I can remember what it feels like to be alive. She smiled for the first time in years. November 18th, 2023. I booked a flight to Puerto Rico. I had no idea that trip would change everything. November 18th, 2023. Old San Juan Market, 4:37 p.m. I was walking through the stalls, watching vendors haggle over fruit prices when I saw her. At first, I didn't recognize her. The girl in front of me was a woman now 21 years old, with hair falling past her shoulders, wearing a simple blue dress. But then she turned, and I saw it. The birthmark on her left wrist, the exact same one I'd kissed 1,000 times when she was a baby. My hands trembled. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would explode. It was her. After all these years, my little girl, Laura. She was holding a small boy's hand, maybe 4 or 5 years old. He had her eyes, dark and watchful. Next to them stood a little girl, no more than 2, clinging to Laura's leg. Both children had her face, her expressions. My grandchildren. I had grandchildren I'd never met. And then I saw him. Justin walked up behind them carrying a bag of mangoes. He put his arm around Laura's waist and kissed the top of her head, the same gesture I'd seen him do 1,000 times before. Laura leaned into him, comfortable, familiar. She didn't pull away. She didn't seem afraid. She seemed content. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. Laura was dead. I'd buried her. I'd spent 6 years mourning her therapy sessions, dissecting her memory support group meetings, where I'd talked about losing my only child. I'd accepted it. I'd moved on. I'd learned to live again. And now she was standing 20 feet away from me, very much alive, very much with him. Our eyes met across the marketplace. For one split second, everything stopped. Her face went white. She saw recognition on my face, and I saw it on hers too. Guilt, shame, fear. All of it flashed across her features in an instant. She grabbed Justin's arm, said something urgently in his ear, and they started moving toward the exit. "Laura!" I whispered, but she couldn't hear me over the market noise. I followed them out of the stall area, my legs moving on autopilot. They walked quickly toward a weathered pickup truck parked on a side street. Justin opened the passenger door for her and the children, moving with purpose. He knew something was wrong. He kept glancing at Laura, then toward the marketplace. I stayed back, pretending to browse the street vendors' paintings, but my eyes never left them. The truck pulled away, heading out of Old San Juan toward the residential areas. I got into my rental car and followed at a distance, my mind reeling. Every turn they made, I made. Every light they stopped at, I waited behind them. They drove for 15 minutes, leaving the busy tourist areas behind. The roads became narrower, dustier. Lush tropical vegetation crowded both sides of the street. We passed smaller houses, family-owned shops, places tourists never saw. Finally, the truck slowed and turned onto a narrow dirt road. At the end of it sat a small yellow house with a front porch and flowering vines climbing up the walls. I followed their truck to a small yellow house at the end of the dirt road. I spent the next few days watching that yellow house. From a rental apartment nearby, I observed their routine. Every morning at 7 a.m., Justin backed the truck out of the driveway. By evening, he'd return. Laura managed the household hanging laundry, taking Noah and Amelia to the park buying groceries. She moved through her life like someone sleepwalking. There was a heaviness to her, a sadness that clung to her like humidity. By Thursday, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I called Sharon that evening. My sister had been my anchor through everything: the funeral, the betrayal, the endless therapy. I told her I'd found Laura. She wanted to come with me, but I said no. This had to be between me and Laura first. Be careful, Sharon had said. Please, Ronald, be careful. The morning was humid and bright. I walked to the yellow house and stood on the porch, my hand raised to knock. Then I did. 3 hard knocks. The door opened slowly, and when Laura saw me, her entire body went rigid. Shock, disbelief, recognition all crashed into her at once. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened so completely, I thought they might break. She looked like the 16-year-old girl I'd lost, but aged by something far darker than time. The sight of me standing there seemed to physically wound her. She stepped backward as if pushed, her knees nearly buckling. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my voice cracking. "It's me, it's Dad." She didn't speak. She just stared, her eyes filling with tears. "Can I come in?" She stepped back mechanically. Noah and Amelia watched from the kitchen doorway as I entered. Laura closed the door behind me. We sat on a worn couch. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I saw you at the market," I said. "I followed you here." She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." Laura finally looked at me. Her eyes were devastated, ancient with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." And then she told me about Justin's manipulation, how he'd isolated her on that cruise, made her feel like he was the only person who truly understood her, how he'd convinced her to disappear and let me think she was dead. She was so young, so desperate to belong to someone, so eager to be treated like an adult. "He said nobody would understand us," Laura whispered. "He said if I told you, you'd keep us apart. The grooming, the coercion, the fear." She explained how once they were in Guatemala and Belize, she realized what had happened. But by then it was too late. She had children with him. She was trapped in a prison of her own making. Every time she thought about reaching out, Justin reminded her of what she'd done. The fraud, the conspiracy, the lies. He'd convinced her that if she tried to go back, she'd go to jail, that I would never forgive her. "I was just a kid, Dad," Laura said, her voice breaking. "I didn't understand. I thought he loved me. I thought I was special. I was so naive, so easy to manipulate." She wept, gasping, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I pulled her toward me and she collapsed into my chest. For the first time in 6 years, I held my daughter. I held the girl who'd been stolen from me, groomed and coerced, and trapped in a cycle of lies and fear. I held her while she cried for everything she'd lost: her childhood, her family, her innocence, her freedom. "I've got you," I whispered. "I've got you now. I'm here." We sat like that for a long time. The afternoon light shifted across the living room floor. Noah and Amelia played quietly in the other room. But we both knew this wasn't the end. Justin was coming home. The afternoon stretched on. Laura made lunch. We sat together, and for a moment it felt almost normal. Almost like we might actually heal from this. Then at 6:15 p.m. I heard it. The sound of the truck pulling into the driveway. The engine cutting off. The driver's side door opening and closing. I heard the truck pulling into the driveway. My heart stopped. Everything I'd waited for over 6 years came down to this moment. When Justin walked through that door, his face went pale. He saw me sitting on the couch next to Laura, and for a split second he looked like a man whose entire world was collapsing. "Ronald," he said, his voice careful. "What are you doing here?" Laura stood up, trembling. "Dad found me at the market. He followed us home." Justin stepped toward Laura, and I saw something I hadn't expected to see: genuine concern. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. When he looked back at me, his eyes were filled with dread and resignation. "We need to talk," I said quietly. "All of us." They sat together on the couch. Noah and Amelia played in the other room, their voices a distant hum. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The weight of 6 years hung between us like a living thing. Then Justin did something unexpected. He started to cry. "I know what I did was wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I destroyed your life. I've lived with that guilt every single day for 6 years. I didn't respond. I waited. Laura wasn't supposed to happen the way it did." He continued, looking at her. "I never planned it. But when it did, when she came to me that night, on the cruise, scared and alone, I thought I could protect her. I thought I could love her and make her happy." "By lying to Dad?" Laura said softly. "By making me disappear?" "Yes," Justin said, meeting her eyes. "And that was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because of the lie itself, but because I've watched you suffer for it every day." He turned to me then, and I saw the breakdown of a man confronting his own destruction. "Ronald, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for grooming your daughter. I'm sorry for manipulating her. I'm sorry for stealing your family and for the pain I caused you. I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway. When I asked, why really? The line, the isolation, all of it? Justin was quiet for a long time. Because I was afraid of losing her, afraid that if anyone knew what we had, they'd take her away from me. So I built walls. I made sure she couldn't reach out to you. I convinced her that you'd destroy us. His voice cracked, but the walls I built became a prison for her, for all of us. Laura began to cry. I loved you, she whispered, but I also hate you for what you took from my father. I know, Justin said, and you have every right to. I found myself speaking before I'd decided what to say. Do you still love her? Truly, Justin didn't hesitate. Every single day. That's what makes this so unbearable. I love her and I've hurt her in ways I can never fully repair. Laura looked at me, her eyes searching. What do you want to do, Dad? I looked at my daughter, the woman she'd become. I looked at the man who'd hurt our family so deeply. I looked at Noah and Amelia playing in the next room, children innocent in all of this who deserved a life without this shadow. And I made a choice. I want to forgive, I said quietly. Not because what you did was okay, not because the pain goes away, but because staying angry won't bring back the years I lost. It won't heal Laura. It won't give Noah and Amelia the chance to know their grandfather. Justin looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. I forgive you, I said, and I'm asking you to do better for Laura, for your children, for yourself. Laura reached over and took my hand. Then she took Justin's. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Trust doesn't return overnight. But something shifted that night. Justin sought therapy. He started attending support groups. He began the long, difficult work of understanding what he'd done. Laura and I rebuilt our relationship piece by piece. She told me stories about Noah and Amelia. I told her about the 6 years I'd survived without her. We cried together. We laughed together. One afternoon, Noah asked me to push him on the swing at the park. Amelia fell asleep on my shoulder, her small hand clutching my shirt. In that moment, I understood something fundamental. Love doesn't erase pain, but it transforms it. I've accepted who I am now, a bisexual man who lost everything and found his way back to his family. A father learning that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing a person can do. Ronald, Laura, Justin, Noah, and Amelia were broken in different ways. But we're trying. We're learning how to be a family. Again, not the way it was, but in a new way. Sometimes the only way to heal is to face the truth, no matter how painful. Was it justice or just another tragedy in a life full of them? I still don't know, but I know this: we found a way forward, a way to heal. Looking back at my story, I realize how many mistakes I made, how many warning signs I missed. If I could talk to every parent watching this, I'd say, don't be like me. Don't ignore the red flags. Don't trust blindly. Don't let love make you blind to manipulation. This is a true story about grandpa stories, the ones we don't usually tell. These grandpa stories matter because they're real. They show us the dark side of love, the consequences of trusting the wrong person, the cost of silence. But here's the lesson God taught me through all of this. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to move forward. It's about protecting the people you love while still finding compassion for those who've hurt you. Don't repeat my mistakes. Watch for signs of grooming in your own families. Ask the hard questions. Protect your children fiercely. And when the time comes, find the strength to forgive. Not for them, but for yourself. These grandpa stories, these true story moments, they remind us that healing is possible, that second chances exist, that broken families can become whole again. If this true story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar, I need you to comment below. Share your thoughts. Share your own stories. Let's break the silence together. And please subscribe to this channel for more grandpa stories that matter. More true stories that heal. Because every story deserves to be heard.